Welcome back to OtakuDaiKun. Dai here, and for this video I've got something completely new planned. I usually don't read fanfiction, mainly because I'm too busy trying to understand what is and isn't canon. That said, I'm often told my lore videos, particularly my lessons in magecraft, help people out when making their own Fate-themed roleplays and derivative stories. My $50 patron, Lunar Worx, has requested I review their fanfic called Fate Prisma Kuro. The whole first arc is available on DeviantArt, and it's a spin-off of Prisma Illya's second season. If you happen to like it, Lunar's also working on a second arc. I have to admit, it's certainly not a professional work by any means, but there's enough charm that if you enjoy the source material, you'll also have a good time here. Mind you, this does require a working knowledge of Prisma Illya's entire first season and the first 3 episodes of Season 2. So, let's get this review started. The fanfic begins not long after Kuro is introduced to the plot of Prisma Illya. Lore-wise, we know that Kuro is a suppressed part of Illya's psyche that takes on its own life with the help of the Archer class card. Initially, Kuro hates playing second fiddle to her main form, and uses her newfound freedom to torment Illya. Normally, after fighting one another, they eventually reconcile with the help of their mother, Irisveal. In this fanfic, however, Kuro changes things up by fusing back into Illya, this time with herself in control of their body. Illya's consciousness is stuck observing as Kuro takes over, only able to communicate through thoughts that can't reach anyone but Kuro. As such, none of Illya's friends are aware of the switch, and are convinced that Kuro was somehow dealt with in private. After that initial setup, I felt like this was going to be a dark turn of events. They're supposed to be a team, but now their antagonistic arc is being dragged out further than originally planned. How does this bode for their pursuit of the class cards? Turns out, Kuro just wants to reclaim the life she was denied. She proceeds almost exactly as Illya would, cooperating with Reen and Luvia's investigation. Beyond her snarky, more aggressive attitude, Kuro still shares a lot of Illya's preferences, like her crush on Shiro. It's just that now, she's no longer being held back by inhibitions. She's more bold and playful. Now, the writing could use some polish. Its vocabulary isn't especially vast, leading to descriptions coming off as redundant or unimpressive. A lot of procedural tasks could be truncated, but instead we're left reading every step of a character entering a room, looking around, sitting down, etc. You can see this when Kuro goes to take a bath. I'm less concerned with every time she adjusts the faucet, and more interested in unique visuals or emotional cues, something like a glistening droplet gathers on her knee before trickling into the tub below. It's a lot like how, when editing a film, you don't need to actually show a character enter and exit every room, or open and close every door. We all get the gist of what that's like. Anyway, now that Kuro has Illya's body, she plans on becoming a mage. She seems to have a misunderstanding of her own past. After all, in the Prisma Illya timeline, Airi and Kiritsugu wanted to keep Illya from being used as a pawn for Grail Wars. They sectioned off and sealed away Kuro in order to protect Illya, who would otherwise become a vessel for the Lesser Grail. Without Airi to clarify, Kuro is left to believe that her parents were traitors, never aware of their compassion. It is true though, Illya/Kuro does have the circuits required to be a mage, even without Ruby or the class cards. When Illya learns about this, she wants to help, but Kuro rejects it. Rather than finding a way for both of them to exist, Kuro insists on leaving Illya in the shadows, as nothing more than an echo in her mind. Before that though, Kuro plans to ditch all of Illya's childish underwear in favor of something more mature. Mind you, she's still 10 years old, so the very thought is kinda cringe. That said, in the original work, Kuro's always dressing more provocative, so it does sound like something she'd do. Kuro hopes to continue fooling everyone around her, but runs into some trouble keeping up the act. Despite being inside Illya for all of her life, her awareness came in and out. That means she doesn't actually remember more insignificant details about her life. Ironically, she depends on Illya to remind her of the small stuff that would otherwise break character. In these situations, Kuro uses her control as leverage, threatening to go kissing people unless Illya cooperates. Juggling between Kuro and Illya's thoughts can be tricky. The fanfic starts to refer to Kuro as just Illya, or Illya in parentheses. The Illya we're familiar with then gets treated as inner Illya. For the most part, this works, but it can get confusing when their dialogue breaks into a mess of female pronouns. Stuff like, she lifted her arms and asked her about her day, something like that. I'm often convinced that prose just isn't a good outlet for this kind of story. For my own sanity, I'll just keep referring to Kuro as Kuro, even though she's in Illya's body. Thus, Kuro starts doing intense exercise, hoping to prepare her body for the strain of activating her magic circuits. Alongside that, her first spells are used to reinforce her body for hand-to-hand combat. Using her experience from the Archer card, she starts projecting swords and arrows. As an Einsburn, she retains knowledge of the family's alchemy, which she uses to transmute Illya's panties into a lacy white. She goes so far as to fully customize her school uniform, much to Taiga's dismay. Following the original story's lead, this fanfic leans heavily into slice-of-life antics. At school, for instance, Illya has to apologize for kissing her friends by beating them in a game of dodgeball. Despite Kuro's threats, she really does want to cherish the life Illya had already cultivated. One interesting theme that gets brought up is whether Kuro is better at being Illya than Illya herself. What if someone could make better use of your own body than you could? What if they became more successful or ambitious? On one hand, it could be enlightening to see just what you're truly capable of. You'd realize you weren't living up to your full potential, likely held back by insecurities. On the other hand, it would be a severe violation of your autonomy. Part of what makes you you is the freedom to not apply yourself. Just because you could do something, that doesn't necessarily mean you want to do it. Now, someone else is making that choice for you. To improve her magecraft, Kuro seeks Reen's guidance, but there's a problem. Reen relies on working for Luvia as a maid to afford her gems and living expenses. She apparently can't spend any time for teaching, and so to free up that time, Kuro is left with no choice but to start helping as a maid as well. Isn't that like child labor though? Pretty sure no one cared about that in the original story either. It's funny that Kuro's main objection to Luvia as a teacher is her annoying laugh. Now, Kuro's stuck hearing it either way. In a rather cringeworthy scene, Luvia insists on buying Reen some new underwear, I guess as part of her maid uniform. When Kuro wants some of her own, Luvia calls upon her butler Auguste to take her measurements. He's an old man, by the way. No matter how professional, that's not really common, especially with minors. Eventually, they hit up a fancy boutique, and Kuro tries on a bra for the first time. I'm not a lolicon, and neither this scene nor its accompanying art do anything for me. That said, if you're really into Prisma Illya, there are some very similar scenes to be found in the original work, so again I guess it fits. I can't say I'm a fan with certain fixations this fanfic latches onto. It spends too much time on matters such as Kuro's new preference in underwear and the modifications she makes to her school's clothes. These moments drag down the pace for me. Do they really need half a chapter describing Reen and Kuro doing housework? In general, though, I feel like most of the characters are written true to character. It's not difficult to imagine these scenes playing out in an anime form. The one exception seems to be how Reen and Luvia act toward each other. Reen's not irritated enough, and Luvia's not arrogant enough. Their typical fighting dynamic is practically non-existent. The story even makes a point of Reen maturing a bit and putting her grudge for Luvia aside. That's definitely not in character, and even if it were, it's a lot less fun. Towards the end, the fanfic hints at a possible romance between them, which may or may not make up for their normal demeanor. On occasion, there are also some inaccuracies to the lore. Reen mentions being part German, which isn't quite true. Her chanting her spells in German comes from her family being distant pupils of Zelrech. If anything, she's part Finnish, with a distant heritage with the Edelfelts. I suppose if you go far enough back, you could say she shares Germanic descent at best. When it comes to fanfiction, though, we have to broaden our horizons a bit. I appreciate Lunar trying to invent new spells that at least feel like they'd be possible in the Nasuverse. An interesting concept is what life was like for Kuro before she was born into the Archer card. According to this fanfic, she was in a dreamlike state, alone in the vastness of her mind. Now that Kuro is taken over, it's now Illya who gets to experience this isolation. While Illya still wants her body back, she's able to empathize with Kuro. In turn, Kuro starts to listen to Illya's input more, acting together rather than against each other. This bears fruit when Kuro has to use her magical girl transformation. She struggles to fly and needs Illya to teach her so that nobody discovers their mind swap. Turns out, Kuro basically has to develop her own techniques with Ruby, since her imagination is so different from Illya's. Luckily, she already has experience using the Archer card, and under the guise of copying the moves she saw Kuro do, aka herself, she can fight like Archer without suspicion. Even with this, though, she needs more help, and Miyu offers to teach her the platform jumping method instead of direct flight. Something this story introduces that doesn't show up in the official works is the idea of sharing one's experience with another. Not like mana transfer, or sharing one's vision, but literally experiencing what it feels like to be in someone else's shoes. When Kuro struggles to form the same floating platforms as Miyu, Miyu then has their kaleidosticks sync up so that Kuro can vicariously experience how it's done. Like, imagine not being able to ice skate, so you tether your experience to a professional's. You'd have a much more intuitive understanding of the muscle memory needed to stay balanced. This would be an amazing tool for any teacher to have, but even for Prisma Illya's standards, it seems too good to be true. The fanfic story takes us through the same general events seen in the actual anime's second season. This includes when Illya's bath gets destroyed, and they go to Luvia's mansion to bathe instead. There's a part where Sella is embarrassed that Kuro is running around without a towel on, but that actually makes no sense. In Japanese culture, you're supposed to be nude in the bath, only wearing a towel when out of the water. This cultural norm is often overlooked in anime because of television broadcast standards and such. That said, I suppose we can pretend that neither Sella nor Illya are aware of public bathing conduct, since they aren't native Japanese, and their own bathroom isn't really big enough for groups. Still, public bathhouses are really common in Japan, so someone living there would surely be aware of them, right? Despite all of her efforts, Kuro nearly blows her cover when Irisfield returns to Japan. Kuro would rather angrily confront her mother than pretend like nothing's wrong. Though, instead of admitting to stealing their body from Illya, Kuro never reveals she and Illya split into separate beings at all. Instead, she plays it off as though Illya suddenly broke the seal on her past memories, and now wants to embrace her mage lineage. In the official story, this is where Kuro, Illya, and Irisfield all resolve their differences and accept each other. Here, however, Kuro totally rejects her mom, refusing to hear how dangerous and corrupt mages can be. Irie plays a much larger role here, teaming up with Rin and the others to go find Kuro. She lets slip to Rin the existence of the Holy Grail Wars, and in turn, Rin gets the idea to consult her parents. We know that in Prisma Illya, Kiritsugu and Irie effectively stopped future Grail Wars from occurring. I suppose that means the Fourth Grail War went down very differently, such that both Rin's parents are still alive. To my recollection, the source material never delves into this, but the fanfic sure does. Still mad at her mom, Kuro runs away from home and seeks out the old Emiya residence. There's some weird continuity going on here. As within Fate Stay Night, the Emiya residence was a run-down building that Kiritsugu bought as a base of operations for the Fourth Grail War. It held no prior meaning, and was just prime real estate between the Tosaka and Mato houses. In this fanfic, though, it's written that the Emiya estate used to be a base of operations for Kiritsugu's ancestors, and it contains books regarding Emiya magecraft, time alter stuff namely. Up until this point, Kuro's been upset that her parents sealed her away inside Illya. She thought it was because they wanted a normal girl, rejecting Illya's potential as a mage. Circumstances get more complicated when she realizes that Kiritsugu was actually a participant in the Grail War. Kuro even finds Avalon hidden within the estate and decides to take it home with her. It's kind of a shame that despite this, Avalon doesn't really get much use in the fanfic. It's just a bargaining chip to get Irie to tell more about their past. I've gotta say, it doesn't feel necessary to spend the larger part of a 4-part chapter finding and exploring a locale that Fate fans are very familiar with by now. As I said before, it's possible to convey more important details in much fewer words. While a lot of this feels drawn out far longer than it needs to, I will admit that the source material, at least the anime, rushes through all this drama far too quickly. It does Irie especially dirty, hardly having her say anything. She comes off as more of an airhead than a devoted mother, never really acknowledging how tragic Kuro's existence is. The anime doesn't delve into the full gravity of what's actually happening. Kuro's not simply an avatar born from Illya's sealed memories the moment she activated the Archer card. Rather, those sealed memories grew into a completely separate personality over the span of 10 years. She was, to an extent, conscious that entire time, trapped in a sort of mental purgatory. The Archer card was merely her chance to escape. In the anime, Irisfield doesn't seem remorseful about this at all, even though it was her mistake that let it happen. Instead, Illya's the only one to pity Kuro and encourage her to use her Grail power to manifest properly. Even that feels rushed because, in that exact same episode, Kuro was still trying to kill Illya. It all just goes so fast. Because of that, I can appreciate how well this fanfic fleshes out those more emotional moments. Illya gets plenty of time to learn about and appreciate Kuro's plight. Irie struggles between telling her daughter the truth of her past and trying to keep her safe. Most importantly, it actually has Irie mention the one thing that clears all of this up. The obvious fact that if she let Illya be the Grail, it would have killed her. I find it strange that Kuro, who remembered being a Grail vessel, wasn't aware of that. Anyway, now that we've got Illya hashing all this out with her mom in the bath, we've reached the point where Illya and Kuro should be happily separated from one another. Except, that doesn't happen in this fanfic. Illya and Kuro go on sharing the same body, taking turns being in control depending on the situation. While it makes sense how they got to this point, knowing how it was supposed to go, it feels like a missed opportunity. Like, if Kuro didn't try to reintegrate, she would now have her own body and could live however she wanted. Now she's stuck sharing it. Part of the drama I expected from this story was having Kuro's secret finally exposed, and the others working to liberate Illya from the back of her own mind. Instead, Illya's fully come to terms with her situation, no longer feeling Kuro is in the wrong at all. Even if someone else did find out, Illya would vouch for Kuro's innocence. Part of me still wishes there were more conflict. In a completely new development, now that Kuro's expressed her desire to learn magecraft, Irie is willing to teach her. Despite how cool that sounds, the narrative takes a dramatic nosedive, going back to superficial stuff like Kuro convincing Miu to dye her hair. Returning to the slice-of-life comedy after all that just feels wrong. The fanfic continues covering the events of the anime's second season, and aside from moments featuring Illya or Kuro, there isn't much to get excited about. Bazette's initial attack on Luvia's mansion, for instance, is just reading a written version of the anime. Even when Illya does show up, the fight isn't much different from how it was in the source material. If anything, it's less exciting, given that now there are fewer combatants. Perhaps to spice things up, Lunar alters the fight so that Kuro installs the Berserker card, something we don't see until much later in the original story. Turns out, having two minds in the same body helps stave off the Berserker card's madness enhancement, allowing Kuro and Illya to use it longer. With the Archer card no longer being used to maintain Kuro, Miu is able to install it to enter the fray once more. That's all pretty cool, but despite this battle being intensified, its outcome doesn't change at all. Now that everyone's scrambling for the class cards, Kuro reasons it's too late to use any of them to manifest a second body. It's a shame, too, since she finally admits it was wrong to steal Illya's body. In other words, they missed their chance to separate and are stuck together in the same body. Fundamentally, this means Kuro's misunderstanding got so out of hand that she ultimately made things worse for both of them. At least that's how I feel. This sets the trajectory for the fanfic going forward. The body-sharing gimmick has overstayed its welcome, and aside from a few cosmetic twists, nothing about the core narrative is actually changed. There's an irony to all of this. As a fanfic meant to focus on Kuro, it actually robs her of narrative presence. Sure, she may be in control of Illya's body, but she still has to assume the persona of Illya. She never gets to interact with the larger cast as a unique person, making her contributions to the story arbitrary. Beyond some new outfits and a slightly different attitude, things still follow the same narrative. I will admit, the body-sharing mechanic was nice for a while, but I think it really should have ended around the Irisfield bath scene. That, or the story needs to start deviating from the source material in more unique ways. Judging by the epilogue of this first arc, that may or may not happen. I guess I'll wrap this review up by going over the pros and cons. For the most part, I liked how this fanfic did a better job exploring Kuro's emotions and coming to terms with herself than the anime. It takes advantage of some glaring opportunities the original story ignores, such as Illya training to use magecraft, or Rin consulting her dad about the Holy Grail Wars. On the flip side, I don't think the whole body-sharing bit is enough to justify retreading the existing story, with certain changes that are ultimately still on rails with the original plot. If Illya and Kuro are gonna keep using the same body, then I'd prefer it take them in a completely new direction, because overall, the original story was better off having them be separate. In the end, if you're willing to tolerate the common issues with amateur writing, I really do think you'll enjoy Lunar's fanfic as an expansion of Prisma Illya's second season. Its first arc spans 14 main chapters and a handful of side stories. I'll link its main DeviantArt page in the description. In the event that you do take the plunge and read it, be sure to let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thanks for watching!
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to OtakuDaiKun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all our anime lore, discussions, and Let's Play content.
You can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or a YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like spicy exclusive vids and early access.
As always, celebrate your fandom! I want to give a special shout out to all my $10 and up supporters: VideoGamer75, Dante Pendragon, Lunar Worx, Stephen Elak, Samuel Gersten, The Nonchalant Ostrich, Otaku Mom, Jens Ballman, Mystic Samurai 1983, Lord Ormagoden, Free Brick, Alexis Yukio Gomez Yamato, Link Pendrago, Observer Bellis, James Hewitt, Uncanny EXP, Zamas Autonomous, Yuki Eidos, Scout, Crow Kalem, Sal Soto, Tristan Riggin, Major, Meifu Mado, Caitlin P, Sogai CH, Vladimirovna, The Taz 96, Jonathan Padua, Kengo X77, Hersha of E-Rated Hands, Alester Bernadotte, and Akakaze Yume. Thank you all so much.